Because sometimes it's not even hate, it's just frustration. Like it's valid frustration.
Yeah.
But you can't communicate that from a stage if you're trying to promote the gospel.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, but my Christianity and my faith comes before my blackness. And so if that's not my resolve as a leader in the church, whether I was white, black, Spanish or whatever, that's not my resolve, then I may need to reconsider my position.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Multi-Ethnic Gospel Approach Podcast, where we cover all things multi-ethnic.
It's the M-E-G-A-P-O-D-C-A-S-T, the Mega Podcast. It's the M-E-G-A-P-O-D-C-A-S-T, Mega Podcast.
What's up, good people? This is Marcel, and you are on the Mega Podcast with my man Micah Gaston here with us. And listen, man, this is episode 4? 4, man. We're doing this, dude.
That's right.
All right, bet. Well, today we get a chance to talk about all things multi-ethnic, and one of the things we want to talk about today is staffing.
Yeah,
staffing in a multi-ethnic church. This could be a very weird topic or touchy topic,
sure,
because there's a lot of unfortunate tokenism that goes with this topic, that comes up in this conversation a lot. And so we just want to just talk about that a little bit and just kind of address the elephant in the room a tad, but also just kind of, talk about what it takes, the level of intentionality that it has. So, I want to go ahead and allow you to kick it off like you do.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there. And then whatever happens, happens.
Sweet.
So, what happens on Mega stays on Mega.
All right, then.
It felt right.
Hopefully, it'll be too unfortunate anything happens. He almost made it sound like it was going to be tragic.
I know, right?
So I think one of the most important things is being able to identify as a pastor, as a leadership team. You need to know the culture of your church. So there's a difference between having a multi-ethnic church or multicultural church and just having a multicolored church.
Yeah. Come on, man.
And so sometimes we can mistake the fact that a church has some diversity in the colors, the skin colors in the church, and that it is a multi-ethnic church. And sometimes that can be the case, but sometimes it cannot be the case, because you could have people that are different colors of skin but are very, very similar as far as their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so, being able to know what type of church you have, do you have people that are coming from different backgrounds culturally, that are coming to the table, that are together in diversity with different norms, or do you just have some people that may look different but are very similar culturally? So I think having honest dialogue about that within your team and knowing, and I think you can look around your staff and see that, what your diversity looks like.
Sure.
And just knowing what your practices are. So I think that's really important. And why that's important is whenever you begin to really want to be diverse in the sense of welcoming diversity to your team, then you at least have an idea where you're starting from. And being able to have honest conversations with new staff members about your current cultural norms. Are they predominantly a white evangelical cultural norm, where if you went to other churches that are white, with the practice, with the style of worship, with the way you do things, you have that in mind. And so I guess a big thing to me is how you begin to address this issue is, if you really want to be a multi-ethnic church, then you have to begin adding to your staff diversity with ethnicity and with culture, and allow them to begin to shift the trajectory of the church culture. And so, for instance, I've talked with pastors of, largely white, churches, or almost all white churches, and predominantly all black churches. And so the difference between a multi-ethnic church and a mono-ethnic church is, because they all say, "Oh, we're very welcoming. Anyone's welcome to attend our church." Right. And although that's great, I think that is a great bullseye or target to hit, that you're normally a welcoming church. Right. It's a different thing to ask yourself, how do we move the culture of our church to where those that are not currently part of our church, we move the cultural need of our church to where it could be a place that they call home culturally, because we've adjusted how we do things So they now begin to feel at home. Right. They don't have to assimilate to our current cultural norms to fit in and be part of our church.
Right. See, that's real key. See, Lord, this is such a good conversation, because there's a difference between being welcoming and being embracing, right?
Oh man, yeah.
So
sure.
like you have bait that is luring and welcoming, and bait for a hunter or a fisherman, is so that they can get something and snag it, and so they can have the win, so to say.
Sure.
And so bait in its natural intent is welcoming to prey. You know what I'm saying? But when you embrace something, it's like you care for it.
Yeah.
You care for it. You want to nurture it. You want to provide a place for it to be celebrated, honored, and just overall just treated well.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of what staffing at a multi-ethnic church looks like is embracing other cultures.
Yeah.
And not just welcoming them, because it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, you welcome them. Now you got black people at your church. Now you have, Hispanic people at your church. Now you have Asian people at your church. But now what? If you just got them there for the sake of, I love the way Pastor Joe said it, or Pastor Ed said it, just for a glamour shot, then that's a win for you, but that's not a win for them.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge, huge difference between being welcoming and embracing. And so that's big right there, man.
Absolutely.
That's big.
That's such a huge step in a different direction. So I think one is simply, and I love how you put it that way, because one is simply pragmatic with an end goal in mind.
Right.
Like we want to become more diverse, where there's a difference in just wanting to be a diverse church and wanting to be a church that represents diversity in a sense that we embrace one another in difference. Yeah. So I love the way that Derwin Grace says it, because he's written a lot on this, got a new book on the multi-ethnic church, which I haven't read yet. It's on my list, but his previous book, High Definition Leader, he talks about, it's not honoring to someone of a different culture to say to them, I'm colorblind. Rather, you say, I'm color blessed. Yeah. And so it's the idea of saying, let me understand the uniqueness and the intricacies of your culture, and I want to value the difference. And so I'm not loving you because of sameness or accepting you in a relationship or being part of our church because of sameness. Yeah. But it's indifference, not indifference, but in our differences that we find the value of how God has made us different in our cultures. And there's such beauty and amazing aspects of every culture. And so as we understand and embrace those things, it can be celebrated, not just like tolerated or like a means to an end.
Right.
It in itself is part of the process that God designed it, like us being able to say, I'm coming from this color, this cultural background, and here's things that are normal for me and things that I enjoy, and being able to receive that from a person coming from a different perspective and to hear the same from them and say, man, that's a different way to see it, or that's cool that, the way that happens in the way that that's not true of my cultural norm, but I love that,
For sure. For sure.
So that's such a big difference. I love the way you put that. It's that's not so bait. It's embracing.
Right.
That's good, man.
Yeah, man. And I think too that the other part of this is that it's actually something we've already talked about before.
Yeah.
But it's about, okay, if you're going to do multi-ethnic ministry, then it's like so for instance, if you are currently, predominantly a mono-ethnic church, but you have, a whole nother ethnicity in your community, that is a significant portion of your community.
Yeah.
And you don't have anything in your, or you claim you want to access this other ethnicity in your community, but you don't have nothing there to offer them.
Yeah.
Then you're really not willing, or you haven't shown that you're willing to embrace that culture and to have something for them once they walk in the door. And so that's the biggest, that part of the staffing element is you're not only hiring or bringing people on your team just for the sake of looking diverse, but you got to make sure you have people there so that you have something to offer the other cultures as they begin to populate your sanctuary. But then too, not just having anybody up there because I'm sorry, just because you black doesn't mean that you can sing. Just because you white don't mean that you can communicate very well.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like those kind of things, or vice versa.
Yeah.
But those kind of things can just be misconstrued over with different people's processes or whatever have you. But whomever we're going to have in a pastoral position in any type of lead position, in any type of volunteer position, I think, we need to make sure that they're qualified to serve in those areas, and not just putting people in place for the sake of.
And what you're pointing out, there's tokenism, right?
Correct.
Whenever you simply want a person to fit a role for diversity's sake, but they don't have the character, the competency, the things necessary to fulfill the role. Yeah,
for sure. Because we've had to turn down some people who had a lot of zeal but just didn't have the qualifications.
Sure.
To meet that particular role.
Yeah.
And I think that as you are staffing, if you're attempting to build a multi-ethnic church and a healthy one, you have to make sure the people that you have in place are qualified, no matter what race they are.
Yeah.
But they're qualified, and it's not just a matter of having them because they look different, but because they can do the job as well.
Yep.
So it's a lot of different little layers to that. Let's kind of move on into the power and reshaping multicultural identity of the church. What do you got to say about that?
So I think that like for instance, like when we brought you and your wife on the team,
For sure.
We recognized that we were largely or entirely, except for some of our people that work with our Spanish ministry, a white staff, white in color, white in culture, and so we had to have conversations. Uncomfortable but clear conversations on the front end, being frank, saying, Marcel, Whitney, we don't just want a person who is coming from, who is black in color but black in culture, who's going to help us make decisions to reach black families and minister to black families in our community, that will help us see practices we're doing we need to stop doing, things we're not doing we need to start doing. And we, of course, we talked about what does that mean for having a diverse worship experience. What does that mean for instrumentation in worship, genres in worship, implementing like spoken word or rap, things we haven't done besides like a guest coming in, And so in other words, changing the culture of your church means not only do you add people to the team that are black in color and culture or the other ethnic groups you're seeking to reach, and they're coming from a place where they truly grew up in that background of the people you're trying to reach. But you have to give them not just a seat on the organizational bus, but power to make decisions. Like you don't just give them a task, you give them something to lead, and give them permission to speak into, practices, policies, those sort of things to say, hey, we need to see as a church, this is amiss, or we need to redefine the win. And I think that's where some churches who don't have a bad intention of bringing on a staff member of different color and culture, but with not having that self-awareness where we started and understanding the end goal is moving the culture of our church, it means by definition, if you're inviting somebody of a different color and culture to join the team, when they do, you are inviting change.
I love that because that's like what you do. As a mentor of mine told me, and you've heard me say this before, but he says, I want to empower leaders to lead. And so that's kind of one of my key principles as a leader is to empower other leaders to lead. But I feel like, not only feel like, but I know that was super empowering for my wife and I, even coming onto the team, to allow us to be able to speak into those policies and processes and things that were going on and things that we could do either better or maybe just things we needed to stop doing altogether or start doing altogether. Those type of moves are so vital, especially, with different cultures, because for so long, I'll just go ahead and address the elephant, in the room, if you will. Like, as a black person growing up here in America, I was taught that, white people don't listen to you. Like, like you're not heard by them. Wow. And so, for you and the Three Circle staff to bring me and my wife on and to value our input and to value what we had to bring to the table was super big. And it's something that we hadn't even seen, even in a mono-ethnic, in our black, church experience. We hadn't seen that level of empowerment, even in that sense. So I'm just grateful for that, but also that speaks to the level of intentionality that you guys had in mind when bringing us on, that it wasn't just a matter of, they're talented, but what they have to bring to the table is so vital for where we need to go as a church. And so that has been extremely evident for me, for my wife and I. And so I don't know, man. That's huge. So whenever you're bringing people, because even if it was like an Asian person, or if it was a Haitian person or whomever,
Sure.
like that has value, especially when you're bringing them into a new culture or into something that isn't mono-ethnic that maybe they're not used to, and allow them to speak into that. That's huge. And then two, you give them freedom to do that. Now, you open up a whole nother door of possibilities
For sure.
of how the church can grow and how they can be super helpful in the processes that you guys, or that, when I say you guys, like the leadership of whatever church is listening right now, that you guys may have been dreaming of doing, but just didn't have the pieces to put together with that puzzle or whatever have you. So just allowing people, man, to speak into the vision, speak into the overall process and all that stuff is super, super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it written in several different places, but it's the idea of your systems and practices and all are perfectly geared to reach who you're reaching.
That's so good.
And so, if I'm only reaching, right, it is. So it's kind of like invigorating and a slap in the face at the same time. Like, oh yeah, that's right.
Right.
And so, if we're reaching a certain color, a certain culture, a certain demographic, we're reaching them for a reason, And so the leaders we have at the table, is there representation for the people we want to reach? If there's not, that is probably a large portion of why we're not reaching them.
Yeah.
And so being able to just look at who you have in leadership and who currently makes up your church and see, oh, well, that's why we're reaching this group really well, but we're not reaching this group as well. And I think Brian Lourdes has some really good stuff. Like he has a book, Right Color, Wrong Culture.
Okay.
That kind of unpacks like people's cultural background. That does a really good job, and he's much more eloquent at it than I am. So I'll just kind of boil it down a little bit. Basically says somebody needs to have enough self-awareness to know where they are too.
Yeah.
Like to know if they're coming from a background where they are so entrenched in their culture that they don't play well with others. You know what I mean? Like of another culture.
Facts.
And the fact is that they may be a valuable part of the team, but they may not be a person that's always on the stage communicating just because they can be antagonistic, in the way that they don't help.
Yeah.
And so it's not that they're not on the team or they don't join the church or that sort of stuff, but having enough awareness that just because somebody's the right color and culture doesn't mean that they're like the key communicator or something. So so being able to know within and have those conversations, which I understand, is not the easiest thing in the hiring process, because a lot of times we're kind of talking about those things we mentioned earlier, like character, competency. Maybe they fit our church culture, but part of that conversation also in a diverse church is where are they in that cultural paradigm. And so and so understanding they kind of need to be a person that's kind of in the middle of the grid he gives, of being able to to come from a different cultural background, but be able to be bilingual, so to speak.
Right.
You know what I mean? To be able to speak into and help engage the other cultures in the church while knowing and having the awareness of their cultural norm of how to help us reach people. And so they really have to have that awareness of their own culture and another culture and be able to walk in both lanes, you know what I mean, and be bilingual in those senses.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think too, just and it's kind of a sidebar a little bit, but even understanding how not to allow your culture to drive or to reshape the presentation of the gospel, right?
Absolutely.
Like, so that's a big part of it, because obviously we're in America and it just is what it is. There are things that happen that if you're not careful or if you're not rooted in the gospel, you will let your flesh rise up and begin to say things from a platform that God didn't call for you to say from the platform.
Sure. Yeah.
And though it may be factual, how does it help?
That's right.
People, how does it help the people in your congregation? How does it promote unity? How does it promote people to God? How does it point people to the Father? And if the answer is, I don't know, or it doesn't, then you may not want to say it.
Yeah.
And so you and I have had some tough conversations about just kind of, things that have been happening. And that's one of the things that I have had to learn how to deal with.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I'm still learning how to deal with it. But that's something that you work out in private, you don't work that out on a platform. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so just having people to understand whomever you bring in on board and whomever you're bringing on staff, that they have to understand those boundaries.
Yeah.
And when not to be verbal and communicate certain things, because sometimes, you don't have all the answers. And just because you don't have all the answers doesn't mean you need to spew hate or spew frustration.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not even hate, it's just frustration. Like it's valid frustration.
Yeah.
But you can't communicate that from a stage if you're trying to promote the gospel.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, but my Christianity and my faith comes before my blackness. And so if that's not my resolve as a leader in the church, whether I was white, black, Spanish or whatever, that's not my resolve, then I may need to reconsider my position.
Yeah. And I think it's really, really important for us that are leading in a multi-ethnic context or striving to grow in that we understand racial reconciliation is not a destination, it's a continuum.
Yeah.
In other words, it's an ongoing conversation. So we live in a culture, in a country, in personal relationships. There are going to be events that are going to happen that are going to cause frustration, anger, resentment, hurt. And I'm not saying any of those things are good, but they are a reality living in a fallen world with fallen human beings. And although there are horrible things that have happened in our history with slavery that lead to the dynamics of race in our country between black and white, there will always be race issues because the human heart builds up idols, and one of those being culture, in which we say to ourselves, we tell ourselves the lie that one human being or one race is more valuable than another. That's inherent to the sinful problem of the human heart. And so people are going to devalue others and overvalue their culture and color because of our sin issues. And it's not good or right or just in any shape of the imagination, but it's a reality. And so it's a continuum. Like, things are going to happen that are going to stir things up, bring up hurts, bring new issues that as church leaders in the multi-ethnic church, we have to be very, very willing to point out the elephants in the room, point out national events, point out things that are happening, saying, this may be what's happening, but here's what the gospel says about this.
Facts.
And regardless of what's happening with those things, we're a family that goes much deeper than the color of our skin. It goes to the blood of Jesus shed for all of us that made us family. For sure. And so I think it's an ongoing process where we're talking through and figuring out how do we do life together and seek to understand one another, seek to love one another, seek to empathize with one another, and love one another well, especially when there are crazy things happening. That we double down on saying less, hearing better, and loving one another well, even if we don't agree about everything that's happening. Right. Just being able to say, you know what, I'm glad you shared that with me. I'm glad I understand better your perspective, because that's love, right?
For sure.
Because love understands that difference is valuable. Like when I met my wife, there's so many things I value about who she is that I'm not. Like, she is super into details. Like, I can have a great vision, and then she's just brings me down, where the rubber meets the road. Like, that's great. How you going to fund it? How you going to staff it? All those sort of things. And so love values difference.
For sure.
And so the gospel, our gospel love compels us to say, help me understand your difference and your different perspective and experience. And it's in that I think we can grow and loving another well, and we can kind of do away with the stereotypes because we have a relationship. We say, so man, I understand better where you're coming from now with that.
So good. So real quick, let's talk about the idea, man, of just being uncomfortable or being comfortable being uncomfortable.
It's like an oxymoron, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
So I know that was a phrase that was coined a few years back. Yeah. But I know we went to a multi-ethnic conference, and one of the statements that stuck with me is that in being in a multi-ethnic context, everyone should experience some inconvenience.
Sure. Yeah.
So that thing just stuck with me. So even as a worship leader, trying to be creative and all that stuff, because we all have our preferences, things that we like, don't like, whatever. But I have always, since I've heard that's been something that's been at the forefront of my mind in leading our people, at Midtown, is, man, just at some point everybody has to be inconvenienced. So whether it's having someone come up and pray in Spanish, without giving a disclaimer, just allow them to pray in Spanish, and in their heart language, and allow all the people who are English speaking people in the room let them experience that because they experience it every Sunday.
True.
So our Spanish speaking people experience that inconvenience every Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, and some words don't translate in Spanish.
True.
So, you know, those moments when we hit those roadblocks, you know, they have to feel that inconvenience,
True.
you know, because our translator can't translate it or whatever have you. So, yeah, I guess we just spend just a brief moment just talking about that, man.
Yeah.
You know, your ideas on that.
So I think it's very easy for us, and we mentioned this in previous podcasts, it's very easy for us to confuse our cultural practices and traditions in the church with the elements of the gospel and what we should be doing in the church, when really we just need to be missionaries preaching and teaching the gospel, being Jesus' hands and feet, providing healing for the community and preaching the good news. Yeah. And we have a lot of things that orbit around that. And so whenever we get into how do we do worship, when we get into how do we do kids ministry, we begin to see difference. You begin to see, you know, where if you're in kids ministry, for instance, and you're in a multi-class scenario, you may have a kid that lives in a violent apartment that's had something tragic happen that week.
Yeah.
And the leaders have to be attuned to, you have a family coming where the kids are in a somewhat normal and good environment.
Yeah.
And then you got kids that are coming from extreme brokenness.
Wow.
And it's not clean. It's messy.
Come on. Yeah.
And so it means being able to whenever he blurts something out about something he saw or heard, that you're able to deal with that in a good way and helpful way. And you don't you don't give a stigma to that kid where he then gets a negative identity because of what he's experienced.
That's good.
Or maybe you're in our worship context, right,
Mm-hmm.
where we begin to sing, and where maybe you came from more of a traditional, white context, you know, where it's much more like, you know, we're gonna read these public readings, or we're gonna, you know, and people don't raise their hands in worship, much less maybe dance a little bit in worship. Don't get, you know, and so you get in a context where, you know, you're used to that, and people start moving around a little bit in a multi-ethnic context. You're like, this is a little different, you know, it's uncomfortable. And so I think our commitment has to be to the gospel and us being a diverse group of people following Jesus together, and being able to say, I'm okay with being uncomfortable, because what's most important about this church is that we are a preview of heaven, not a display of my norms.
That's good. That's so good. Now, I ain't gonna lie, like that whole worship environment thing, I had to get used to.
Sure.
I ain't gonna lie, because, you know, where we come from, man, we were a little radical, to say the least.
Yeah.
So, you know, coming to a room where it wasn't as that, you know, but still very heartfelt and very sincere.
Sure.
You know, just shown and expressed in a different way.
Yeah.
And just note to any worship leaders that may be listening, it's okay. Everybody don't have to do what you say all the time. It's okay. God is still getting the glory. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Well, guys, I think we're out of time for this one. But man, it's been a great discussion. Thank you as always.
Yeah, man.
This is the man right here. I don't know how many times I can say it. Just it's the truth anyhow. But y'all, thank y'all so much for tuning into the Mega Podcast. This is your boy Marcel with your boy Micah.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? I might start saying that from now on. Your boy.
There you go.
Your boy. Anywho,
I'll take it. I'll receive it. Next Mega Monday. See you then.
I did it right that time. You feel me?
Yeah, that's right, because I did this one.
Anywho, bye, y'all.
All right, then.